everybody. Welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me, as always, are my fabulous co-hosts.
Hey, Rob, it's me, Diana Perry Cruz.
And it's me, Jackie Perry Cruz. Just kidding. It's just Jackie.
Hey, and we're joined by
Jackie.
We're joined by a lot of special guests out in the audience. People want to say hi real quick?
Woo!
I hope that came into the microphone.
It's going to sound like one
muffled,
person.
It was thousands of people.
It was so
Y'all
many
missed
people.
it.
I turned my microphone out.
Roar.
I turned my microphone out just like the artists do when they want you to sing the song.
Okay.
See, there you go.
There you go.
It works.
Yes, so this is a special live recording to the people who are here, not to you listening at home, of ABA Inside Track, because this is our 300th episode of our podcast about behavior analysis and behavior analytic research, in which every week for more than 300 weeks, we have picked a topic and read relevant research articles and then discussed them. That's what we do.
Way more than 300 weeks.
It's way more than 300 weeks.
Because it's 9 years.
9 years,
Almost
yeah.
9 years.
And then we can do this later for 10 years.
Yeah.
How nice. So many celebrations of us. We love it. So this is our 300th episode. And Dinah, what is our topic?
Yeah, so the title of this episode is Vaccines Do Not Cause Autism. And
We gave it all away in the title.
Yeah, there's no secret back half reveal on this one. I think it's an important topic, and it's one I want to make sure everyone is well versed in and can speak on, as it seems to be quite relevant. So that's why I wanted to do it.
Why is it relevant? Where are you seeing it in the world?
You know, it's out there.
Social media,
The mean
maybe?
streets.
Everywhere. Yeah. On social media, in lots of different places.
Mm-hmm.
But even amongst behavior analytic conversations for BCBAs, I've seen some of it too, which was part of why I wanted to talk about this with this specific group of folks.
Okay.
Yeah. And then the event that we're at is titled Funpocalypse, but the episode is titled Vaccines Do Not Cause Autism.
Yes. Which I don't understand why we called it that. That was not,
Funpocalypse? That was your idea.
well, I think it's because you referred to it as an apocalyptic event when we were doing the preview. So I turned into the skid and I called it a funpocalypse.
I like it.
I didn't know it would keep.
I like it.
Anyway.
Okay.
All right, so this is our 300th episode, but before we get started, here's some fun facts about ABA Inside Track. We have recorded, this is the 300th main feed episode where we had a clear topic, and then we had articles and we discussed them. But this is not actually our 300th episode, in the fact that we actually also have done, in that same time, we've recorded 17 book club episodes, which are like 2-hour versions about a book. We've also recorded 35 bonus episodes, which are all manner of stuff. One was just, I took all the edits from people saying, and dumb things we'd said that I cut out, and I made an episode that I thought would be really easy to put out our first Christmas. And it was a lot of work, and I never did it again.
Is that the bloopers episode where I was talking about farting?
Yes. There was lots of farting talk. I got everyone saying 1,000 times. But that was back when I used to edit the show myself. So we had a lot of ums. So technically, this is episode 352. However, if you look online at Apple Podcasts, it will say that we have 509 episodes, which is not true because 16 of those book club episodes, we do like a preview version and then a full-length version. So that's like doubles up. And then we had like 2 episodes I think we redid because it was relevant to the topic at hand. So like we're probably at about 491 technically recorded episodes. But in terms of these full-length episodes, we are at 300. But I just thought it was worth saying, because some people might be like, you've done this like 10 years and you only got 300 episodes. Most people do like 2 podcasts a week, when they're making their podcast about video games or whatever, politics. What do people podcast about? That's not behavior analysis. I don't know.
Murder.
Oh yeah, a lot of murder podcasts. The murder podcast is one every week.
Love podcasts.
A lot of murder. Anywho,
Murder and love.
some fun statistics about the show, and now let's talk about vaccines not causing autism. We've got.
We can't do that. I just want to say one other thing.
Oh, yes, please.
Which is, we would not have kept doing this show for 9 years and 300/500 episodes without
509
listeners, because it's just screaming into the void otherwise. So thank you to everyone who listens to us, and thank you to everyone who came tonight. We totally appreciate it, and we couldn't do this without you.
Everyone, please clap louder so
Nice.
our mics pick it up.
More applause.
All
Just
the jokes
kidding.
are so funny.
Okay. Something's wrong with this thing.
You
got
broke.
What's wrong is I broke
We've
it.
had these mic stands for almost 300 episodes
All right.
as well.
Do you want me to tell you what articles are in this episode?
I'd love to hear it, as would the audience.
Okay. I'm going to do that now. We are going to bring in 4 different articles to discuss tonight, and they include what every behavior analyst should know about the MMR causes autism hypothesis by Ahern and published in Behavior Analysis and Practice, most likely in 2011.
2010.
2010.
2010, sorry.
But it was the couple years where they put pictures instead of years.
Yes.
Who decided that, what we need in our behavior analytic journal for practitioners? Pictures. We don't need
liked the pictures.
We don't need the year this
The year was an
published.
oversight, the absence of a year. Okay, these are not in the order we're going to talk about them in, but the next one I want to tell you is finding more constructive ways forward in the debate over vaccines with increased disability cultural competence by Alvik Harju and published in Medical Humanities 2023.
Now you got one job on the spot.
Next up, how the case against the MMR vaccine was fixed by Deere and published in the British Medical Journal 2011.
I can't believe that one was published in a peer-reviewed journal, by the way.
It's a little loose.
It's very loose.
Little cash.
You read it, you're going to be like, there are incomplete sentences all over this.
Did you know that the BMJ, I thought it stood for the British Medical Journal, and then I looked into it when I was doing citations.
Oh, is it wrong?
No, it is just the BMJ. That is the name of it.
Well, I
What's up,
just
England?
called it the wrong thing, but
That's all right. It's like a BFG.
that stands for something. Big, friendly giant.
It's a big medical journal.
Okay, and finally, vaccines are not associated with autism. An evidence-based meta-analysis of case control and cohort studies by Taylor, Swerdfiger, and Eslick. And that was published in a journal called Vaccine in 2014.
All right.
Okay.
Those are our articles. So I want to start us off. I want to paint a little word picture. Let's do a flashback. Where were you back in the day when vaccines caused autism?
In 1998?
No, not like after that. Like later on. Like late, when it was still going on in
In the
early
2000s?
Early 2000s something.
I was
Are you asking us?
Yeah.
I'm asking you, yes.
I was 20, drinking a lot, being in college.
I more meant your early years of your career when this was still a discussion.
Oh.
It was like, well, in high school,
Oh,
I
okay.
didn't know this, and I didn't care
Right,
because I was in
yeah.
high school.
In high school and college, I didn't know anything about this. The only thing I learned about this probably in 2005 because I didn't care about vaccines at that point because I was too busy drinking,
Okay. It's great.
to be honest. So I think 2005 for me was when I first came across it. Maybe 2004.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's when we kind of entered into the field, and it was already a pretty present conversation from the get for us. Certainly, when Bill Ahern published that paper in 2010, I heard a lot about that. Yeah.
That was
How about you?
thank you for asking. It was just one of those things that kind of starting in the field. So would have been like 2003, 2004.
Are you wanting me to talk about Jenny McCarthy?
I mean, you can talk about Jenny McCarthy.
Jenny McCarthy.
And
And her stance that vaccines caused autism and her, therefore, subsequent anti-vaccine stance that got a lot of attention. She wrote some books about it. And that never sat great with me because she's really not a medical expert in those areas.
She since retracted those statements.
Okay. I interrupted you.
well, you asked me a question and then, didn't want the answer. Which, I think early days of starting in the field. And that seemed to be like the popular discussion. And so mostly I feel like I started hearing about the vaccines autism in terms of, people who were writing some of these articles saying like, nope, that's not true. That's not a thing. Don't worry about it. A lot of gluten casein-free diets based on, I don't want my child to get autism, or I heard this is related to autism, therefore I better, switch diets. So that's usually where I'd heard about it. And fortunately, I wasn't advanced enough in my career that I felt comfortable telling anybody, like, that's not true. I was just sort of trying to do my job the best I could, so I never got in any, arguments about it, but it just felt like you couldn't go anywhere kind of working in the field of autism care and autism treatment and working with families without someone mentioning it at some point. Maybe just, well, we're trying this, we heard, but like everybody had heard something about it at that point. It was very pervasive. And then it kind of went away, and then it sort of never really went away all the way. Like, it's still one of those things that you still hear it. I think you started hearing, that fear, even like looking at, COVID, looking at just the fear of vaccines. And it's not like that just came out because of the kind of the Wakefield work, but it was something that I think for our generation, and certainly the generation coming up after us, that would be where our vaccine fear would probably have come from, I would guess, for a lot of people.
I didn't really think about it. I think for me, it's always been present. I think with most families I've worked on, it's a discussion that I've had. Yeah. Cool. This is the part that
I think we should get
into
into talking about the history here because
yes, let's do that. So I'm going to start with kind of a quick summary, and then in that summary, we're going to pause and go more in depth into sort of where some of the kind of the broad strokes came from. So where did vaccines cause autism as a hypothesis come from? So we're going to flash back. Jackie's in high school. It's 1998. She's probably drinking as far as she's concerned.
No, in 1998, I was not drinking. I was going to be a nun. Okay. In 1999, that's when I started drinking.
Okay.
So in 1998, I was
pre-drinking Jackie in 1998.
I was very devout.
And Andrew Wakefield, a British doctor at the Royal Free Hospital, publishes with, I think, 11 other co-authors an article in The Lancet, which is like the fancy British medical journal.
Fancier than the BMJ.
Yeah. And in this article, he reports on 12 cases of children that have this intestinal inflammation. And from that, he speculates, could this inflammation have to do with the fact that they recently had an MMR vaccine and that the measles virus might have leaked from the vaccine and in their gut, where vaccines end up, and gotten into their bloodstream and gone into their brain and caused developmental changes that led to autism. And the sort of subtle hypothesis was, well, the MMR vaccine caused the autism, and autism and GI problems are like intractably linked forever and ever.
Well, just note, if you don't know, MMR stands for measles, mumps, rubella. So it's a combination vaccine. So you're getting kind of like a bunch of stuff at once. And it's typically administered right around 15 months of age.
So at the time the publication was not, I don't know if anyone's like read it or looked at it, or I think we saw Brian Deere talk at Babbitt one year. It's not this like article where it's like big news flash, vaccines equal autism. Like it's kind of boring. But at the end, there's sort of a sense of, yes, something related to gut problems and the MMR vaccine might be correlated with increase in autism. So perhaps the two are together. However, as much as that might sound like, well, maybe it's just a loose correlation. We get those a lot in medicine. They didn't have all the information. But it seems like afterwards, anyone who would interview Andrew Wakefield about his findings would find that he was very upfront about the fact that he did believe that it was the MMR vaccine that was leading to these cases of autism. And he'd share lots of other unpublished research. So anyone who would ask him the question, he would be like, of course, this is why. It's MMR vaccine. That's the problem. Britain didn't test this vaccine enough, and now we have all these cases of autism. And so you might ask, okay, well, why might he have published this? Were there other reasons? How did he come to these conclusions? And so to that, we're going to go to reporter Brian Deere's article that Diana is going to discuss.
Actually, Jackie.
Oh, Jackie's going to discuss.
I'm
Sorry,
going to discuss it. So this is if you want to read like a real laid back, chill article on a Friday night, this is one of those that you should read because there's some incomplete sentences. It's like someone's like come to tell you the tea, like all the gossip about life. So I liked that, but also it was hard to review because so it's laid back and chill. So Brian Deere is a reporter that likes to uncover, he finds something fishy and then he goes and really does a good deep dive dig. And so what he did is he wanted to look at some of the discrepancies between what the article published and what children's parents had said to him when he had met with them. So some of the things that were different when he interviewed parents of the children that were supposedly in the study versus what was actually published in the study was previous diagnosis, things such as symptomology, onset, that might have been different. Gut inflammation was different. So there was a lot of things that didn't mix well initially with him. And so he did a lot of digging. And originally what they found was that parents were told when they were recruited for the study, typically they were referred through the study by an anti-vaccination movement, being like, oh, look, they're looking at this. And they were told that they were trying to create a study to sue the vaccine manufacturer. So that also gives us a little pause, right?
That's not unbiased research.
It is not unbiased research, right? And he also found out that prior to this study, there was a confidential grant application. How did he find that, by the way? Right? Well, as I'm reading this, I'm like, ooh, where did he go to find that? That him and his colleague had published that they were looking for a brain bowel connection where if there was
Wakefield in his college.
Wakefield, they put it on this grant application where they thought that there was this correlation between leaky gut and the brain, which might cause regressive autism and previously undiagnosed kids. And so even though he said that the study was the first time that he had published about that, that was untrue. So there was another little sneaky thing there. So before the study was released, Wakefield wanted to find this temporal link between the vaccination and inflammation in the gut, and they wanted to see that symptoms would appear within a week of vaccination, right? So your kid is fine, they're doing amazing, they get the vaccine, and in a week time, usually they say temporal link is like the most is 14 days, but it's usually around 6.5, which changed across different iterations of the study, that kids would start getting fevers, they would start regressing in their language and communication, they would have some severe diarrhea, and potentially have onset of like colitis or Crohn's disease. And so that would then cause them to have regressive autism. So what he did is Deere went and talked to all of the parents that were supposedly in the study. And what they found is that with child 11, symptoms actually started too soon, and they actually started before the vaccine. So parents reported that around 13 months, so that was actually 3 months before the child got vaccinated, they started to have behavioral symptoms and some concerns. And so that was one area which was was misdiagnosed, right, in the report. And also in the study, it said that afterwards he had significant behavioral symptoms, where in the actual medical report, it just said he had a chest infection. So when you're looking at those two, they don't really match up. So Brian Deere talked to the parents of child 2 as well, because he was the best case scenario. So before the study, he had what they had considered Crohn's disease, which is a bowel syndrome, and he, after the MMR vaccine, did have regressive autism. He's one of the only children in the study that actually had regressive autism after the paper was published. But prior to being seen by Wakefield, they saw that he had all of those symptoms prior to the study even starting. So
Got it.
There was no, he had the vaccine, but everything else was documented very clearly in all of his medical notes prior to that. So yeah. And so almost all of the children that were referred by the anti-vaccine group or referred by someone who was already in the group that said, hey, you think your child has autism, you probably think it's from the MMR vaccine, you should go to this study and help. So the study stated that all of the children were of typical development prior to vaccination, but child 4 and child 8 actually had developmental delays before vaccinations according to their records. And the girl in the study there was only one girl. The girl in the study had medical issues before vaccinations, but actually got better after medical interventions and was totally fine following the MMR vaccine, which they conveniently left out of the study. So one of the children developed symptoms of autism 2 years after vaccination, which doesn't align with their 14-day period, right? But they said that within the 14-day mark, he was very pale and that he had a fever. But he wasn't taken to a doctor, so nobody could actually write that down. But parents reported that was when...
And you can have a fever after vaccine.
And you can be pale.
Sure.
Right?
Yes.
I'm pale all the time.
You can attest.
So that was a little, important to note. And so also in the study, they said that 8 out of the 12 parents believe that the vaccine caused autism, when in reality, all of the parents in the study had stated to Brian Deere and to the researchers that they believe that the MMR vaccine caused autism. So the final thing that I wanted to put out about the study is that the children were selected based on their symptoms, similar to Crohn's disease, and not just randomly selected, right, from the pool of children at large in England, right? They all had symptoms of Crohn's disease when they were referred. But then, following, at the end, only 9 of the 12 children actually had normal bowels. When they had, their bowels tested, 9 out of the 12 actually had normal bowels, which wouldn't, link to this brain-bowel connection.
Right.
So there was
even amongst this sort of pre-selected group that might have had those issues, they weren't seeing them at the end.
Yeah, so really nothing about the article was correct.
Correct.
And there's more, too, that we find out later, right, about how there might have been some misplacement of some RNA and DNA.
There was a sense that one of the lab technicians had reported, listen, we're not seeing these results that you say we should be looking for. They're not there. That if they even saw them, it would have had to be based on a sample, being incorrectly placed into the original sample. Not like they were making up the results in terms of physically making up the results, but someone would have had to screw up a sample handling or something to get the results based on, whether you're looking for DNA versus RNA. And we didn't go too much into that, but there were a lot of errors that seemed to be happening in the study, and a lot of reporting of what was supposedly true not actually having happened.
Yeah, right.
Oh, but again, the word is out there. And as we wrote a whole book called Calling Bullshit about once you get bad information out there, it is infinitely harder to get truth out when you're looking at bad information than it is to just get bad information out there. There were a lot of other changes going on in terms of increased broadening of the autism diagnosis around that time too. So when we saw increases in the number of children diagnosed with autism, plus this guy Wakefield out there saying, oh, it's the vaccines, it's really a perfect storm of everyone suddenly saying, oh, well, there's an increase. It must be a medical reason. What's changed? It's got to be this. It's got to be this vaccine. And again, there were lots of reports going, it's the thimerosal in the vaccines that are doing it, even though a lot of thimerosal had been removed from most vaccines at the time of these increased numbers of diagnosis of autism. So that didn't really make sense. So again, there's lots of information out there. And I think Brian Deere really led the charge of this was a terrible article, and everything that anyone is describing as to why this would be true, that MMR vaccines cause autism, there's nothing to support that, at least as far as he could tell. Plus, Wakefield was getting paid by a lobbyist or by a lawyer to try to prove that there was a connection here.
To 23,000 pounds, which is not a little bit of money.
How much is that in American dollars?
23,000 pounds.
$30,000. It depends on the year, really, right?
Whoa.
Because the pound used to be a lot stronger against the dollar.
So in 2024 pounds, it's like £1 billion, maybe.
Probably like 1 billion.
With all the
Cormac, you'll know.
Yeah.
Yeah, Cormac knows.
Not fair.
It's okay, $30,000. You're right on.
Thank you, Cormac. Hi, do you want to be a BCBA, also known as a board certified behavior analyst?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Massachusetts to get your graduate degree, just minutes outside of Boston.
Choose from any one of these courses:
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education, dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years.
And our 2022 graduates had a 92% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy approved fieldwork placements, ethics mini handbooks, PhD levels professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland if interested.
And don't forget, our program is accredited by the Association of Behavior Analysis International, or ABAI, as a Tier 1 master's degree program.
Don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu.
regiscollege.edu.
One more time, www.regiscollege.edu.
See you there.
Bye.
Hey everyone, sorry to pull you out of our live recording into the present, but I want to make sure that everyone listening knows that ABA Inside Track is ACE and QABA approved. By listening, you're able to earn 1 learning credit. All you need to do is either have been at the live show, in which case your CE is already there, or need to go to our website, abainsidetrack.com, and put in some key information. Or you can click the link in your podcast player notes section, and that'll take you directly to where you can put that information in. We're going to have 2 secret code words in this episode you need to fill out. The first one, and actually both of them, are from our audience, from our studio audience. And that code word is handcuffs. HANDCUFFS. You know, it's the thing that the police put on you and then your hands are together, right? Hopefully you're not handcuffed to your computer listening to other podcasts. You want to listen to this one, right? But in any case, handcuffs. All right. And now let's go back to our live 300th episode.
Just to summarize here, it is important to analyze these types of correlations, right? So we're not saying that, it's misguided to pursue, fact finding. However, they came into it with their own preconceptions of what was going to happen, and they cherry-picked the data from there. So Brian Deere did a lot of background work to uncover what was really going on here. And if this is, I'll just say this now so I don't forget, if this is of interest to you, reading about this, there's an excellent book called Autism's False Prophets by Paul Offit, O-F-F-I-T, that goes through this series of events in great detail and is definitely worth a read.
Some of the parents even called and said that why is he even asking these questions?
Mm-hmm.
And
oh, really?
Yeah. And he said, they're looking into the study to see if it's unethical, but I just want to know if it's true. I love that.
So by July 2007, there was an investigation by the General Medical Council of Britain into Wakefield, and 2 of the co-authors on there, looking at their fitness to practice medicine, because there was enough evidence to support that this article data had been falsified in the article, that Wakefield was engaging in behavior that was potentially dangerous based on a limited sample set. And they found that Wakefield was guilty of misconduct related to his line of research here and was described as, quote, dishonest, irresponsible, unethical, and not acting in the best interests of the children studied, unquote. And 10 of 12 of the authors said, get my name off this paper. The Lancet retracted the paper, which...
Big deal.
It's always a big deal when something gets retracted.
Yeah.
So we've got this paper that everyone was citing as this is the smoking gun of vaccines cause autism. This paper's not going to convince anyone, or shouldn't convince anyone, because it is a bad research. Whether it was purposely falsified, whether it was accidentally falsified, these results don't play out. However, even though Wakefield and some of his colleagues, at least one of them, didn't get their name off the paper, I don't know why. It seems like you'd want to jump off that sinking ship, but maybe he and Wakefield were super buddies. They're
maybe
really
he
tight.
died.
He also could have died.
I don't
We don't know about
he
that.
was the ride or die friend.
Wakefield's the one that never stopped talking about this stuff.
He lost his medical license.
He did lose his medical license.
He lives in Texas now, too.
does.
You can go be his friend.
He makes all sorts of anti-vaccine movies, I think,
does.
too. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But in any case, just because this is one bad article, like you were saying, Diana, doesn't mean that maybe this is a bad article, but could this still be a truth? Could vaccines cause autism? So now let's turn to the article in the journal Vaccine. I wonder what their results will be. And see what other research is there to support or refute this hypothesis.
Are you surprised that there's a whole journal called Vaccine?
Vaccines are very important and deserve their own journal.
I think there's probably a lot to say about
yeah.
vaccines, and it's published in Vaccine. But
I'm gonna subscribe.
it's just not something I'd ever thought
Like,
about.
ooh, vaccine. Excited.
Who's on the cover of this month's
Some
Vaccine?
of the things discussed in this article were not things I knew anything about. So you might
I
be
can't wait.
in over your head as well.
What do you mean? No, I'm really smart.
Okay, so this is the Taylor et al. 2014 article, and it's not
Bridget Taylor.
No,
You were gonna say
it is
that.
not. These folks are Australian.
And it's L. Taylor.
Yes. Only 3 authors on this paper, which I kind of figured would have like a whole bunch of authors because they did so much work here. So this is not the only article that you could find to, try to really scientifically determine if vaccines and autism are linked. However, this one compiles the data in a meta-analysis, and it had really stringent criteria for including the studies that they did in the study. So for me, this is the one to cite. If you're like, I know there's some research out there. Like, this is a good one to hold on to if you need to tell someone a place to look. So they went through a long process of determining which studies to include because there are quite a few out there, and they found 10 studies that they felt to be of really high quality and caliber. And they included those here. So there's just 10 that they were looking at. However, those 10 studies have so many participants in them.
When I saw this number, I was like, I don't even know if I could tell you what that number is.
Right. Exactly. So 5 of the studies are what are called cohort studies, and 5 of the studies are called case control studies. And in the cohort studies, all 5 combined, there were 1,256,407 children involved. And in the 5 case control studies, now this number is like small in comparison, there's only 9,920.
Try harder, research group.
So all combined, that is an extra big number. That's over 1 million data pieces, right? Participants who are in this study that we can make some statements regarding. Now, you might wonder what a case control study versus a cohort study is, because I did, and I looked it up. I said I used my good buddy Al, which is actually just Google AI, and Al told me a case control study, this is quoting from him, starts with individuals who already have a disease / cases and are compared, we compare their exposure to a potential risk factor with a group of people without the disease. And disease, we're talking like medical terms, right? We'll put that aside for now and discuss that again later. So that's the control group. And then in a cohort study, it follows a group of people with a shared characteristic over time to see who develops the disease, allowing for more direct assessment of causality between exposure and outcome. So that's why there were fewer folks in that kind of study, right? Because that's harder to do. So the case control, it says it looks backwards, meaning we find folks and then we look backwards to see what happened with them. And then a cohort study is where it looks forward. So from the point of exposure to whatever happens in the future. All right. So that is why there are these 2 different types of things going on here. These 3 authors looked through over 900 studies, and I love this. They were like, in any language.
And then you just
we were prepared to learn any language in the world to be able to bring this information to you.
I would have loved to be like at their table when they're like, what's our exclusion? There isn't any.
That's kind of hard-hitting research I expect from Vaccine.
That's right. Hard hitting. Yeah. So they combed through these studies. They started with 900. They ended up with just 10. And they had, like I said, a very specific set of criteria that I won't fully go into. But they wanted to ensure that the studies were going to look at exposure to either MMR vaccine, the cumulative amount of mercury that the child was exposed to, and or the cumulative amount of thimerosal that the child was exposed to. So both mercury and thimerosal were used as preservative agents and, conduits for the vaccine at varying points in history. Thimerosal was largely removed from vaccines in the early 90s. So they had exposure to that, and then the included outcome measures for these studies needed to be either that children went forward to be diagnosed with autism, and or in some studies specifically a regressive type of autism, right? So remember, the MMR is given right around 15 months. When we see regression in autism, it's very often right around that same time period. So there could be temporally a correlation there. They also noted that studies that recruited their participants through what's called the VAERS, which is the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System here in the United States, those were included because they really could not verify.
They were excluded, right?
What did I say?
Included.
No, that was wrong. They are excluded due to the impossibility in verifying that information and what they called inconsistent data quality, because it's a self-report system and they just didn't have enough to go on for those. So they didn't include those. But like I said, they had 10 very strong studies that they did include. Guess what, guys? All the studies were published in English. Phew! So they were able to read them all. But they did come from a variety of countries. The countries were the UK, Denmark, Japan, the US, and Poland. So at least there was a range of studies there. Then the cohort studies, which were the ones that were followed over time. 2 of these looked at MMR specifically, 2 looked at mercury, 1 looked at thimerosal, and then on the output side, 4 of them looked at ASD generally, 1 looked at regression specific. The case control studies, which are the ones that are compared after diagnosis to see, what exposure they had. 4 of the 5 of those studies were specific to MMR. 2 of the 5 also looked at the measles only vaccine, and then 1 of them looked at the mercury and thimerosal levels. So once they had all of that, then it was time to take data. They looked at the study design, the country, the sample size, the intervention, meaning the type of dose and the timing of the vaccines, the outcome measure, which was when and how ASD was diagnosed and whether there was regression involved. And then they did important work regarding effect size and additional presence of confounding variables and how one should account for those. And that was the part where, Jackie, I said you and I might be in a little bit over our heads.
That's where I would. Yes. That's what I would death stare and just read over it and then keep going.
And I was like, statistics. Yes. And they also assessed the risk of bias that was present within each study, and they did lots of IOA for all of these things. And they really, really wanted to do a good job, and they demonstrated that to us in the ways that they wrote this article up. So then from there, they used a random effects model to calculate the pooled odds ratio of developing ASD alone or ASD after exposure to the vaccines. They also evaluated the chance of developing ASD after exposure to all those different things that are named, MMR versus thimerosal versus mercury, etc. They also included, when they did all their fancy statistics, what the size of the group was, the size of the study, as that can impact the likelihood that you might see outlying results. So again, they were just demonstrating to us that they did a very, very thorough job. In the results section, we're here. Cohort studies all said, this is quote, all 5 found no increased risk of developing ASD following MMR, mercury, or thimerosal exposure. And in the case control studies, all 5 found no evidence of association between vaccines and ASD, whether evaluated according to the condition or the exposure type. Further, all correlations were non-significant.
Shit. Right? That's what we're saying there. That looks pretty good.
It's very solid.
Yeah.
Yes. And this isn't just one study, right? Remember, this is the meta-analysis of 10 different studies who all did very good jobs as well. So that brings us to our conclusion. These authors said it was very unlikely that these studies were biased. They all did very good jobs on their own. It would be unlikely that they were only representing like one side of the story, right? And that the other side of the story, which would be that vaccines are causing autism, is just unpublished, especially considering if there was contrary evidence out there, a lot of people do seem to be looking for it. So we would likely see that in publications. They said the studies had overall sound methodology. They had moderate to low risk of bias within them. They evaluated very large populations. As we said, over 1 million participants were involved in totality across these studies. They're like, you don't believe us? Fine. Go back. Read Cochran et al. 2012, which is another meta-analysis that included more studies, but they had less stringent inclusion criteria. In them, they also reached the same exact conclusion. No link could be drawn between the MMR vaccine and ASD. Now I would like to give you a couple quotes from the article because they're just really good. So Taylor et al. Said, as every treatment has the possibility of adverse effects, those found to be associated with MMR vaccination included, okay, did I make that clear? They're saying, I'm not going to read it. I'm going to paraphrase it. Sorry. They're saying it is possible that there could be adverse effects associated with vaccination, right? Just as there are potential for adverse effects to be associated with other types of medical intervention. There's also adverse effects associated with life and being alive, right? So, specific to MMR vaccination, it is possible that there could be side effects. Some of those side effects that are known to occur include aseptic meningitis.
Sounds horrible.
Yeah, it's not
Which
good.
part, the aseptic or the meningitis?
Both.
Yeah. So that's known. It's a known side effect, right? Febrile seizures, right? You said fever, right?
Yep.
So high fever in young kids can result in seizure. And also thrombocytopenic purpura. Oh, shucks. I looked it up and I was like, oh, I'll totally remember what that meant. I forgot. It wasn't actually as bad as
Sounds bad.
the phrasing was. The phrasing makes it sound real not good. It is. It's low platelet count.
Bring it to the dentist.
There we
Thank
go.
you, Karen.
Karen.
Thank you. Okay, because I was like, oh, that sounds like, I didn't know what that was. Yes, okay. So not good either. So those are all like possible things that can happen, right? And when you get a vaccine for your child, they give you a sheet that's like, these are the things that could happen. We want to make sure you know the risks. So vaccines are not risk-free. However, they go on to say that many conditions were found to be unlikely associated with vaccination, and those that are unlikely to be associated includes autism. All right? Then further, maybe this part I'll quote. Let's see. Yes, this is the one I want to quote to you. While at the level of the individual, avoidance of immunization may be seen as conferring lower risk by avoiding possible associated adverse effects, the increase in parents deciding to take this course of action has substantially decreased herd immunity among populations, subsequently increasing the risk of catching potentially more serious infectious diseases. Thus, the risk incurred by not immunizing a child is increasing substantially as levels of immunization coverage fall. In regard specifically to the fear of a child developing autism following immunization, the data consistently shows the lack of evidence for an association between autism, ASD, and vaccination, regardless of whether the intervention was the MMR vaccine itself or one of its components, providing no reason to avoid immunization on these grounds. End quote.
All right, so we have this published in 2014. So it's been a rough 18 years, vaccine, anti-vaccine groups. But now we have this data. We all shook hands and moved on, and it's never been a problem since. Oh, but wait, no, it still is a problem. This study continues to sort of have ripple effects to this day. Just following the Wakefield publication and the fervor over, are vaccines going to give my child autism? We saw, and this is again going back to the Ahern article, you saw an increase in cases of measles from 56 in 1998, 56 total cases of measles in the UK to 1,400 by 2008. So we'd almost eradicated measles. We almost did it, everybody. And that is no longer the case. We saw the government, specifically the British government, spending millions and millions of dollars to deal with the
millions
fallout.
Of pounds.
Millions of pounds. It said dollars in the, it said 4.4 million, and I did not write if it was pounds or not. If it's 4.4 million pounds, that's like
it's 3.1 pounds. 3.1 million pounds.
3.1 million pounds. Thank you. So 4.4 million American bucks to deal with lowered vaccine usages, because you need to have about 95% of your population using a vaccine for it to be effective, at least for measles specifically. We also started seeing more and more parents following some of the publications of these studies starting to change their stories of when their child started to develop signs that could be kind of correlated with an autism diagnosis. Some had reported concerns more about, well, I'm noticing some things are a little different about how my child perceives the world by about first birthdays. But as time went on, more and more parents reporting it happened after the vaccine. That's when I knew they were autistic. Not that they would have done person first language at that point.
I can say that, right, and as of 2023, 10.3 million cases of measles were present worldwide.
Ugh. We almost got rid of the measles.
That was a 20% increase from 2022.
Oof. So this also led to one of the other effects was more people believing that autism and GI problems go hand in hand. If you're autistic, you probably have some sort of gastrointestinal problem, which led to a rise in lots and lots of alternative fad diets, some of them being very, very dangerous, some of them just being non-helpful. A lot of the gluten and casein-free diets, which again do have medical value to folks who are allergic to gluten and casein, but were being used in these populations, which caused lots and lots of parents to spend lots and lots of money following treatments that were based on a faulty hypothesis. That's not meant to blame any parents because, again, you're hearing all of this on the news. You're hearing the narrative being like, oh, you got your kid vaccinated and your kid has autism. Probably your fault. You need to go do all these other things. That seemed to be the message that was around at the time.
More parent blaming.
Yeah, a lot, and we'll talk a little bit more about that with our last article as well.
Yeah.
So again, we had all these other fad treatments coming up. Not that fad treatments hadn't been around before, but they really were hitting harder and harder as time went on here. We saw more and more of the diet restrictions. And again, this fear about vaccines and the risk is just one more in sort of the history of vaccinations that has led us to a lot of the concerns that people still have about the safety of vaccines to this day. So, all this being said, while we all know that autism is not caused by vaccines, it doesn't necessarily tell us what do we do with this information. And I was really excited, Diana, that you put in the Alvik Harju article because it really changed my opinion of, well, how would you talk to someone? For many of us, if someone came up to us and said, hey, you get vaccinated, you're going to cause your kids to have autism, we tell them that they're wrong. We tell them that their science is bad, right? But how far does that get us in a conversation? I don't know how many of you got to have fun conversations with family members back in 2021 around the Thanksgiving table about whether or not the COVID vaccines were or were not appropriate to have, or how much the cell towers were going to make you infertile because they're spreading COVID, or whatever kind of nonsense science was out there. But I'm sure many of us have had that experience firsthand of people not trusting vaccines. And if you ever tried to tell them how wrong they were and how right your science was, it probably didn't result in them saying, you know what, you're the smart one, you would know best. It
People
probably
love
resulted
being
in a fight.
told that they're wrong.
Yeah, everyone loves it. Everyone loves being wrong and being told there's new information out there. So we could certainly go back and forth and talk about, well, does this reflect how we should be continuing this conversation today? But instead, this article, the Alvik Harju article, really reframes how are people scared of vaccines, or how do people talk about vaccines in ableist language? And even if we think we're doing the right thing by saying, there's no science to back up the vaccines cause autism or the vaccines cause X, Y, and Z, we might actually be doing everybody a disservice, including many of the individuals that, many of us are either, currently in our career or have in our past careers supporting and working with. So again, Dana, you found this article. So where did this, I didn't actually get a chance to ask you, where did you find this article? Because I don't think I'd ever thought of telling people that that's not true. Vaccines don't cause autism. I never thought of that as being potentially an ableist discussion. And we'll talk a little bit about why in a minute.
Well, it is something that I had thought about before and probably had read in, not in published literature, but in varying capacities. So I was familiar with the idea already that by saying, oh, if vaccines cause autism, I'm not going to get my child vaccinated is equivalent to saying I would rather my child get some terrible disease than be autistic.
And die.
Yeah. So when you put it that way, right, you can hear, right, the ableism kind of in there. And so I already knew that, and I really wanted to have that be part of this conversation that we had today. And so I just looked around to see. I was like, hopefully someone's written about that in a journal. And they had. And so I found this article just by, doing that.
Yeah, it's
Google scholaring.
Yeah, it's a really great one. And we're going to talk a little bit about it now, but I do encourage everybody who is interested in supporting, non-ableist language and is really interested in thinking about a new perspective of this discussion about vaccines and, what causes autism. It's really kind of a way to reframe how you might have had that conversation before. Because I know reading it all of the arguments were ones I'd been making for a number of years at various times, and really kind of reflecting on how that would play into ableist language that I certainly do not want to use, but was inadvertently doing. So when we talk a lot about vaccines, when we talk a lot about how autisms do or do not cause vaccines do not cause autism, what we're doing is playing into a lot of the stereotypes that were going around at the same time. And really some of the common narratives that we were seeing, which are the author talks about being the narratives when we have these conversations are either the death and survival narrative, the societal problem narrative, or the preventative narrative. So when we talk about vaccines do not cause autism, or adversely, maybe that vaccines do cause autism, which would be incorrect, we're often really thinking about it from this story of, like you said, Diana, your child being autistic is the end of your life as a family. Your child is no longer a person because they're not an able-bodied individual. And if they have autism because of your use of vaccine or because of your not use of vaccine, then you've done something wrong. And if you survive, mom and dad, it's through your courage. It's kind of that like survival porn mentality of like those movies where it's like, oh, we found out about our child's disability, but through our love and support, we had a bunch of kooky adventures and one or two scenes that were kind of rough. But in the end, everybody turned out okay. But by everybody, it's just us, the parents. We don't really care about the child as anything but window dressing in our triumphant story. And if you were reading, well, I mean, I'm not
what
saying,
was that?
I hate those movies. They suck. But in any case, that was the narrative at the time when you'd have those discussions. The idea of if you do or do not vaccinate your child, they could get autism, and that would be the worst thing that could ever happen to you. The others,
right. So it's built into the idea that disability is less than in our society, and folks are not viewed as valuable if you have a disability.
The other societal problem narrative was one that Wakefield would espouse, which is we need to stop these vaccines because there's too much autism. And if there's any more autism, society will fall and crumble, which again is just so devaluing of individuals based on their neurodiversity, which again was not a term that I don't think he ever used that. I don't know if he uses that term now, but I would be shocked.
We don't know.
But that idea of that was a lot of the media narrative of like, we don't want to have more autism, so we better stop with these vaccines, or we better find out what the cause of autism is so we can do something about it, which again was our last narrative, the preventative narrative.
I was just going to say, we haven't touched on the idea of, is there more autism, right, today than previously? I feel like that might be a whole different convo.
Yeah.
I don't know if I want to squish it in here.
I don't think we should.
No,
right?
I mean,
there's like kind of a lot to say regarding that. So I'll save that for another go round.
The answer could be maybe.
Listen to our episode where we discuss the book Neurotribes, on sale now. We do go into it.
You can listen to that for free.
Or you can listen to it for free. It is also on sale. In that sense of free.
It's also $0.
So again, these were the narratives that were coming out at the time, most of the discussions around vaccinations. So a lot of times when we talk about whether vaccines do or do not cause autism, we're playing into one of these narratives. We're not having a discussion about what this says about who we want to be as a society. It's about that medical model of how do we keep out certain people because they're less than. And when we approach a vaccine conversation from just trying to prove someone wrong because of their science, we're inadvertently still having the same conversation as we've been having back in the late 90s and in the early 2000s about the value of other human beings. And one way that we could be thinking about having conversations about vaccinations and health and the medical model is really talking more about how we as a society value or don't value certain people and why that might be and why that might not be what we want to do. And if we could do less othering and more, building togetherness bridges. That sounds terrible. I'm sorry I said that, everybody. It sounded very cheesy.
Oh man, so embarrassing.
Some of the concerns around vaccines wouldn't really be concerns anymore. Because a lot of time what we're talking about are families that are just really worried. The author goes into sort of some of the narrative around autism from like the 70s and the 80s. A lot of you might have heard of like the refrigerator mother theory, the idea that, well, children are autistic because the mothers are cold and uncaring like a refrigerator, and they didn't give their child enough love, and that's why they became autistic. So we already had a lot of parents who were feeling blamed by everyone for the burden that their child now brought to society. So when the vaccine and anti-vaccine kind of discussion started coming in, it was just one other way that parents were sort of made to feel bad by others. So it's not too shocking that a lot of parents would just have so much sort of hate being thrown their way. They're the caregivers. Didn't they know better? Didn't they want to take better care of their child? That they would respond to this narrative with defensiveness, with getting upset, with lashing out at maybe vaccine manufacturers or the medical establishment or other people. And I can't speak to parents from 20 years ago because I'm not a parent from 20 years ago.
Almost.
Hey, thanks so much. But it does feel like a common narrative. You know, I could certainly see that as being kind of part of why so many people jumped onto this discussion, because they were just hearing how badly they were doing from so many corners. And again, that whole conversation, whether you're saying, no, that's not fair, you shouldn't say that to parents, it still goes into the same ableist narrative. So really reframing how we talk about this as less about science was good, the science was bad, you're right and you're wrong, and really wondering, are we doing our part to have conversations outside of this context of othering any specific group? And just by changing that conversation, would that remove vaccines good, vaccines bad from our kind of day-to-day conversations? I don't know. That was kind of my take home from the article itself. And certainly the author goes a lot more into the idea of disability cultural competence, which certainly we've been talking as a field much more about cultural competence. But what about disability cultural competence? And I think that can be a very tricky conversation to have among certain people. Certainly, I know I do like having been in the field for a long time and having a lot of perspective, but to some extent, I kind of wish I were just starting out now with people telling me about cultural competence, because I feel like it's so in line with what I've always wanted to do. But I've had so many years where I've had a lot of my own fun privileges as a white man. And so it's always a little harder to have these conversations because I never had to have them before. And change can always be a little scary. So that would be a nice way to be kind of starting in. But it's never too late to have these conversations. Oh, you're laughing at me now. I feel like I'm just going off on a weird soapbox. Sorry.
No. I enjoyed your soapbox. So this article is by Alvik Harju. And then she quotes a good bit in that cultural competence, what's it called? Oh, disability cultural competence, by another author called Garland Thompson. That's a double last name, Garland Thompson. And that made me want to go read her work. And Alvik Harju has also published several articles as well that all sounded very tantalizing. So you should get out there and check this person out if this is something that you're interested in. I don't know about you, Jackie, but I found this article to be just an absolute mic drop. Like, I loved, she came strong and she did not quit.
Within the first paragraph, she was like, do you want to have just a disability or do you want your child to be dead? And I'm like, ooh.
Yeah.
Spicy in your first paragraph.
Yes, right? Yeah. She went for it throughout this article. And clearly this is something that, she feels very passionately about, as do we. And she came in just
hot.
Exactly. For the whole thing. And it kind of this article, the core of it is, this is an issue that we think that vaccines are bad because they might cause autism, because that means that we think autism is bad at its core, right? That's the central idea that she's pulling from here. But then, like you said, Rob, she pulls in so many other really important points, about how we view disability as a culture and how we can change that view, and the pieces that we're putting on parents and the ways in which society is impacting this. It's a really comprehensive article in terms of what we might take away from this. So it's not solely about vaccines. There's a lot of stuff in here just about disability pride, right? Moving from awareness to pride, and many additional points. So I totally recommend this.
I really loved the point where she was talking about how the media plays in to the disparity, right? So she said, in the 90s, autism was a white problem because white people had the money to get their child diagnosed, where there was disparity in healthcare. And so it wasn't, when we looked at the data, it actually wasn't a white people problem. It was a healthcare access issue. And that the media often portrays autism, especially in the 90s, right, by just quirky or really, really smart, like Rain Man, right? And
only young kids,
which also then promotes more of an
infantilizing.
I can't ever say that word.
Yeah.
Of autism. And I had not thought about that in this way. And so then it further devalues grown-ups, adults.
Yes, right.
That have this disability. And then we see that now too, because the media has done that. And then we see people that work in adult services sometimes call their consumers their kids or, like their buddies, which is not appropriate to speak, with an adult person.
Yep. She talks about, having an anti-vaccine stance is really coming from a point of privilege very often. It's folks who, have the money to take that position or to feed their kids like, super fancy diets and things like that. And I lost my train of thought.
Fancy diets.
Fancy.
Chicken nuggets.
I don't know what else I was going to say.
Well, since we're really close to almost staying within our time frame, I think it's probably a good time to move into Dissemination Station. Ooh.
Yeah.
There it is. We've been doing that for 300 episodes.
Every week. Yep.
Have you ever gotten tired? You ever want to change it up?
No.
For the next 300, Jackie, you want to make a different sound?
I want you all to know where it came from, too. This is a side. It came from a commercial in the late 2000s, early 2000s, where a family was sending their kid off to college, I think, and they had like a trunk. And they were like putting the kid on the train, and then the parent was like waving, and the kid was like jumped off the train and hugged the mom, and it made me cry.
Mm-hmm.
And was it like an old timey train?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. I don't even know what it was for. I can't even remember.
Was it a commercial for Kleenex?
Oh, maybe.
Because I distinctly remember a commercial for Kleenex where, like, I think people were getting married and then someone was leaving. And I remember it being like 9 or something. And I was just crying so hard watching that.
Oh, wow. Kleenex.
I've never been afraid to cry in front of a crowd, folks. So, be careful.
I'm going to find it and we can put it in the show notes.
Let's put it. Can we play it behind us on the screen?
We can play it.
That'd be great.
But that's where it came from.
Wow, you remember the source of the sound effect itself. That's great.
That's the sound the train made.
That's the sound the train made as the kid went away. And the mom, or whoever, I thought it was a kid and mom, but maybe it was a married couple.
Did she pull a tissue out of a Kleenex branded tissue box?
There was a jingle. I remember it was like a really good, like they hit those minor notes. It was really good.
I don't know, y'all.
Okay,
anyway.
Okay.
That's where it came from.
Wow. And I'm going to cry every time you do this stupid sound effect. All right. Anyway, Dissemination Station. So this is the part of the show where we talk about kind of our general thoughts and recommendations for folks. And this isn't really a recommendation article, topic in terms of we certainly would recommend that, vaccines are very, very helpful and you should get vaccinated for various diseases. Certainly I would think so, but talk to your doctor before doing so. But when it comes to vaccines and autism, whether it's historically or whether there's an increase in kind of misinformation around the link between vaccines and autism, what if instead of saying there's a lot of research to support that you are wrong or agreeing, what if you just stepped away from the argument altogether and really thought about what is the narrative and the story that we're telling when we have these kinds of conversations? And it's not necessarily just about good versus bad science. It's about who we as society value and why might we get scared about things and why that's not necessarily the best way to respond and how we might be pushing that as a story for people to be scared of.
There is an overall approach, I guess, or viewpoint in our society that any deviation from the norm is bad, right? And I think when you're a new parent and you're going into the idea of having a child, you never think about what if my child deviates from the norm? Like people, I don't think ever, really think about that too much. And part of the reason for that is that we really hide disability in our society. And you don't see a lot of representation of folks with disabilities in the media, right? If in school, they might kids with disabilities are in like different classrooms often, so you might not have exposure to them if they're not in included settings. And for these reasons, it really is not like a big part of a lot of people's lives. So it's not out there in the consciousness that what would it be like to have a child with a disability. So I think that perspective that there's a discrimination against people with disabilities is really baked into the core of our society, and parents who are, can be really worried about that because they've never had that exposure. And there is that idea that's, really, it doesn't even have to be conscious, right? Like bias is not conscious, that if I had a child with a disability, it would be a bad thing. So a lot of this fear related to vaccines is stemming from that idea. And that's a larger idea than just vaccines. It's our understanding as a society of difference and disability, and how do we incorporate folks with disability into our society, not just like, accepting people and saying like, you can be over here on the side, right? But like, how can we really and truly integrate folks into society? Whenever we have these conversations, I feel like I start small and then I get really, really big because the problems are really, really big and overarching. But so the MMR versus vaccine versus autism convo is just one small piece of this big, big hidden challenge within our society.
It's good. It's a good one. I have been wondering, so what will you say to a parent now, right? After we've had this discussion and we know that saying vaccines don't cause autism, what will you say to a parent who says, I'm worried that the vaccine will cause my child to have autism? How will you tell them in a way that's kind and compassionate?
I think focusing on that your child is going to be your child. And if they're whoever they are, they're still going to be that child, whether they are or not autistic. And if they're, who they are, it's interrupted by a society that is very unbending in some ways, we'll take it from there. We'll come up with some great solutions to make sure that they can navigate, and we'll work together on that. But their health is going to be number one, because if they get measles or mumps or rubella, that's going to be pretty bad. But, go into that conversation with your doctor with that in mind, that your child is still your child, regardless of whether they have a diagnosis of this or diagnosis of that. They're still who they were before.
Still people, humans.
Yeah, they're human. I probably wouldn't say human. That sounds weird.
Human.
Cut that part out of my conversation with a hypothetical parent.
Why? We're all human.
I don't know. It's calling someone we're all human sounds weird.
Okay.
You could say human.
That sounds even weirder.
When people forget the age. We're just humans. I used to have a professor that would do that. Let's talk about humans.
Ooh. How's that sound? Good?
Yeah.
Did you like that?
I did, actually.
Okay. It's off the dome.
Boom.
Yeah.
And that was good. Yeah, I think, I agree. Like, whether someone gets a vaccine or not is not going to impact whether they are autistic or not. That comes prior to vaccination, and it shouldn't have any bearing on their value as a person.
And one thing we didn't say that I forgot to say earlier is that there is a correlation between when you get your vaccine and when there usually is an explosion in development. Mm-hmm. Right? So we did not say that yet. And so children may be not developing on the trajectory of typical development even before, but it's less noticeable.
Right.
Because of the huge explosion of skills after that, like 1.5 to 2 to 3, right? Because that's when language explodes. That's when, critical thinking starts coming. It's huge. It's gross in a good way. Right? But it's like it's big.
Awesome in like the big sense of the word.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's like so big. And I think that's something that we haven't talked about, is that they happen at the same time.
Right.
And so, of course, we all know correlation does not cause causation, right? Correlation, not causation. But I can see why, in some senses, where people might say, oh, look, these two things happen at the same time. I got the MMR vaccine and now I'm seeing slower development.
Right. Or regression.
Mm-hmm. Right? Because that's when you would see it anyway.
Yes.
So we didn't say that. and I just wanted to say it.
I tried to say it, but you said it better.
Boom.
So good job.
Thanks.
All right, let's do one last segment. We got pairings. What do we got in store for pairings,
Yay,
Diana?
it's time for pairings. Pairings is the part of the show where I tell you about past episodes that you might want to go check out if you thought this one was interesting. We haven't talked about things that kind of relate to this topic too very much, but we have had a few episodes where we do some debunking of other topics, so I brought those in here. All the way back, episode number 3, we talked about social stories and reviewed some of the research regarding that.
That one's a hilarious one. So you should listen to that.
Is it?
Yeah.
I don't remember episode
I do.
3.
I actually do
That's
remember
funny.
it because I just started re-listening to the old ones because I want to see how many times I said that I wasn't going to have kids. And then I did. And it
That was
was
like
a
a runner
lot.
for the first year of
it
the
was.
show.
I said it so many times, at least 3 or 4 times during the episodes. The first, second, third, fourth one. Like,
Yeah, you did. It was like a running joke
I'm
for
like,
a while.
oh, good thing you
I
guys
don't
have
have
kids.
children.
I don't, and I'm never going to have them. Turns out I do have one.
Yeah.
Time makes fools of us all.
Yep. And so I did listen to it. It was a good one.
So we were funny back then,
Yeah.
at the very least. Okay, episode.
We were rambly. We were more rambly than we are now.
Wow.
I find that hard to believe.
Yeah.
Okay, episode 220. We talk about facilitated communication. You could check that out. And then episode 263, we talk about, it's an ethics episode where we talk about the ethics of fad treatment. So it's tangentially related. And then recently in episode 295, we talked about ableism. It was specific to the school setting, but there's some good, nuggets in there. And then I thought you also might wonder, what did we do for our past hundreds episodes? So episode 100, we had Dr. Gina Green on and talked about the history of ABA with her. And then episode 200, we had Dr. Matthew Broadhead on.
Sir Matthew Broadhead.
Sir Matthew Broadhead. And we talked about ethical decision making with him. And who knows what we'll do for our number 400 episode.
Who knows indeed.
The other part of pairings is I recommend a snack for you to enjoy while you listen to this episode, except that this comes at the end after you've listened. But you could eat these with the other episodes you go listen to. So the snack today is pizza and popcorners.
But we don't even have popcorners.
We don't?
No, you bought veggie sticks and Doritos. So I was gonna change it.
Oh, pizza and veggie sticks.
There you go.
I forgot what I purchased.
There we go.
Okay. Pairings. Please enjoy.
All right. Well, that brings us to the end of our episode. We want to thank a couple people. We certainly want to thank everyone who's here, who came out and spent a Thursday night joining us for a live recording. We really appreciate you coming out to see us. And that would be, that was really nice of you. Thank you so much. We also want to say thanks to a few other folks. Thank you all again for giving us our fun code words that we'll be putting in. We won't record that now because that's always boring to listen to. We do that later. But for everyone listening, the code words were from our awesome audience. We're going to thank Dr. Jim Carr for recording our intro, outro music, which we should have called and see if you wanted to come play it live for us.
No,
or
that's
something.
okay.
Wouldn't that have been fun?
But
No?
also, on a side note, you want to know where that came from is we were at Babbitt at a party once, and Jim Carr, who
Everyone had matching towels.
and we were at a party, and he was the president of the BACB at the time.
Yeah.
And he's like, Diane and Jackie, I really need to talk to you. And I'm like, oh no.
We're like, it's
getting in
going down.
trouble.
Yeah.
We're
Oh, my
getting in
God.
trouble. And he like pulls us aside, and he's like, I have something really important to tell you. And I was like, what? And he's like, your song sucks. And I was like, oh, if you want to make, he's like, I play in a band. I'm like, if you want to make us a new one, you should.
And he did.
And he did. And he sent it to us. So that's where that came. I thought we were getting fired,
Yeah.
but we really just had bad music.
Yeah. Yeah.
I paid $15 to license that song back in the day. And now we got Jim Carr recording it for us. And also Kyle Sturry, who has done our interstitial music for at least over 200 episodes.
Yeah.
And
Cool
Dan Thabit of the Podcast Doctors, who edits our show, which I used to do by myself with my own 2 little hands. And it was so incredibly boring and hard. So I am so glad we have someone who can do that for us. Hey, folks, before we wrap up, I want to make sure you get the second secret code word. It is pickle. Pickle. It's a brined cucumber. Delicious. Or you could use it as an idiom, like being in the biggest pickle of your life. Something in when you're in danger, right? Either way, pickle. All right, now let's head back to the end and wrap up our 300th episode. That's it. That's 300.
Yeah.
Next week we'll have episode 301. But until then, keep responding. Bye.
Bye.